A very good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Abhishek R, and I'm the Associate Professor in the Department of Anesthesiology in DMM's Wayanad. Firstly, I would like to thank the head of our department and the organizing president, Dr. Vandana Kulkarni, madam, for giving me the opportunity to speak in the CME. And today I'll be talking about the emerging trends in the pediatric difficult airway. And my focus will be mainly on the emerging trends which are related to the pediatric airway assessment, and the emerging trends in the difficult airway algorithms, and the emerging trends in the approach strategies as well as devices. But first, I would like to highlight the historical events that changed the practice of management of difficult pediatric airway. 1926 to 1941 was a very important time period in history. This was the era of Magill, Miller, and McIntosh. This is where majority of the laryngoscopes that we use till today were invented and redesigned to fit the pediatric airway. The pediatric airway was first described by Ekenoff et al. Based on cadaveric studies in the year 1951. He described the pediatric larynx to be funnel shaped, with the narrowest portion being at the level of cricoid cartilage. But various imaging studies using CT, MRI, and video laryngoscopes done by Littman et al. In 2003, as well as Dalal et al. In 2009, and very many other researchers found that the cricoid cartilage is elliptical in shape, and the funnel-shaped hypothesis has been questioned. They also found that the narrowest portion of the larynx in the pediatric airways is at the level of vocal cords. 1967 is a very important time in history. This is when Dr. Shigeto Ikeda first invented the flexible fiber optic bronchoscope, which revolutionized the management of difficult airway with the advent of awake fiber optic intubation. But at the same time, all this contribution happened because of Dr. Chevalier Jackson, who was considered to be the father of bronchoscopy. 1981 to 1988 is considered to be the era of laryngeal mask airway and the supraglottic airway device because of contribution of Dr. Archie Brain. This revolutionized the management of difficult airway in both adults and pediatric patients. Exit procedure or extrauterine intrapartal treatment is a landmark procedure. It was first performed by Norris et al. In the year 1989. There's a partial delivery of the fetus from the uterus. And after the partial delivery, there's an airway is being secured either by direct laryngoscopy or either through surgical airway. The first procedure was done on a case of cervical teratoma where there was a huge mass in the fetus in the anterior aspect of the neck. And in 1997, Mikeliska et al., they standardized this procedure and provided guidelines. There are very, very rare case reports of this exit procedure being done in India. I could only find 2 case reports so far. Early 90s is when the difficult airway management algorithms came into clinical practice. There was a systematic approach which was evidence-based and given out by airway societies all over the world. Today, there are more than 14 difficult airway societies which give guidelines on management of both adult as well as pediatric airway. Another important difficult airway milestone is the year 2008, where ECMO was used as a part of management of difficult airway in pediatric patients. Sheridan et al., they first described ECMO being used in a patient with severe burns. There was a 2-year-old kid with severe burns contracture in which bag mask ventilation was impossible. LMA insertion was difficult. Endotracheal intubation was also anticipated to be difficult. And surgical access was also very difficult in this patient. So the patient was put on veno-venous ECMO and successfully managed, and release of burn contractures was done. Now let's look at the incidence of difficult airway among the pediatric population. Gomez et al. In 2013, they conducted a prospective observational study among the ages of 0 to 8 years for almost 3 years. This was one-of-a-kind study with the primary objective was to find out the incidence of difficult bag mask ventilation. And they found out the incidence of difficult bag mask ventilation was 6.6%. And in a similar study conducted by Malivan et al. In 2020, they found out that whenever there's a difficult back mass ventilation, applying an open airway maneuver, such as applying a continuous positive airway pressure of more than 5 centimeter water, or putting an oropharyngeal airway, or asking for help and doing a 2% mechanical ventilation, almost reduced the incidence from 6.6% to 2%. Now, coming to the incidence of difficult laryngoscopy in pediatric patients, the incidence is about 0.07% to 3%, but it is almost 4.7% times more in children less than 1 year of age. The incidence of difficult unanticipated intubation in children is about 0.03%. If there's only one number that you have to know, it is this number, which is 0.03% is the incidence of unanticipated difficult intubation. This data was taken by Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Difficult Intubation Registry, which collected data from 8,800 children, whereas the overall incidence of difficult airway was around 0.42%. Majority of the difficult intubation was anticipated difficult airway intubation. The European Society of Anesthesiology conducted an audit called as the NECLEAN audit in July 2021. They came across 4,683 encounters of difficult airway, and they found out the difficult intubation was almost 5.8%, and bradycardia was the most common complication associated with difficult intubation. And again, the National Audit Project of the UK, which examined data from 309 hospitals, they found out the cannot intubate, cannot oxygenate incidence is almost 1 in 10,000 encounters, up to 1 in 50,000 encounters in routine GA. And this CICO incidence was suspected to be 10 times more outside the OT, like ICU and the ED. Coming to the complication in children with difficult airway, the pediatric difficult intubation register, or the PEDI registry in 2016, they came across 1,118 difficult pediatric intubations, and they found out almost 20% of children had at least one complication. 3% of the children had cardiac arrest, and remaining 19% were non-severe complications such as laryngospasm, bronchospasm, and airway injury. Coming to the tools that we use to predict the difficult airway in pediatric patients, there are multitudes of bedside tests that we use on a daily basis. But there are 4 tests which have stood the test of time, which mainly include the modified Mallampudi test, the upper lip bite test, the thyromental distance, as well as the low BMI. These 4 predictors of difficult airway have very high sensitivity and specificity, as shown by systematic reviews and meta-analysis, as well as Cochrane reviews by many researchers. The incidence of difficult airway in pediatric patients with syndrome is very high. As you can see in this chart, there are a lot of syndromes that are associated with difficult airway. For example, most commonly seen is the trisomy 21, where we can see the cervical spine abnormalities, tracheal abnormalities, pharyngolaryngeal abnormalities, and macroglossia. In such patients, a focused airway assessment is needed, along with our traditional bedside test. The use of the COPER score, also known as the Colorado Pediatric Airway Scoring, is known to predict the difficult laryngoscopy and intubation. According to COPER score, we assess mainly the 5 components. Number 1, the chin. Number 2, the mouth opening. Number 3, the previous history of any intubations or obstructive sleep apnea. Number 4, we examine the uvula. And finally, we examine the range of motion, of up and down motion, which has to be observed from the ear to the orbit. Each component is given 4 scores, and the total score of more than 12 can predict difficult intubation, and such patients require awake fiber optic intubation. And according to COPER score, a score of more than 16 necessitates surgical airway. So use of COPER score along with our traditional bedside test can increase the incidence of predicting difficult airway in such syndromic patients. The most important emerging trend that I'd like to talk about is a point of care ultrasound. And ultrasound is without a doubt one of the most important and versatile tools that we have in current clinical practice. And I'll be focusing more on the use of ultrasound in pediatric difficult airway. The ultrasound can be used in many procedures, but most importantly, it can be used to predict the size of the endotracheal tube in pediatric patients. Shibasaki and Kim et al. In 2010, they came up with the formula to calculate the outer diameter of the endotracheal tube. They divided their sample size into 2 populations. Group A received the traditional age and height-based endotracheal tubes, whereas Group B, subglottic diameter was calculated, as shown in the picture. A high-frequency linear probe was placed transversely over the cricoid cartilage, and the subglottic diameter was calculated. And the linear regression model was used to find out the relationship between the subglottic diameter as well as the age and height formulas. So using this model, they came up with a formula which says that the outer endotracheal tube cuff diameter is equal to 0.46 into subglottic diameter plus 1.6, whereas the formula to calculate the outer diameter of the uncuffed tube is equal to 0.55 into subglottic diameter plus 1.16. And they also found the ultrasound to be highly accurate in predicting the ET tube size. In the cuffed tubes, the accuracy of ultrasound was almost 98%, and in the uncuffed tube, it was 96%. And using the Coles, Kynes, and Motoyama formulas for age and height, the endotracheal tube size prediction for the cuffed tube was only 35%, whereas the uncuffed tube was only 60%. Choosing the right size of endotracheal tube in pediatric patients is extremely crucial and very important. Using the height and age-based formulas in pediatric patients can be very tricky in Indian population. There are multiple times where we have used smaller size tubes to intubate such patients. And choosing the right tube can prevent airway edema, subglottic stenosis, and post-extubation stridor, and many such airway complications. The point-of-care ultrasound can be used to predict difficult laryngoscopy in pediatric patients with the use of submandibular ultrasound. There are two approaches of doing submandibular ultrasound. Number one is the transcutaneous approach and the sublingual approach. In the transcutaneous approach, it is less accurate in pediatric patients, but is highly accurate in adult patients. Whereas in pediatric patients, however, we can use a submandibular ultrasound to detect any laryngeal pathology or any tumors, any abscess, or any epiglottitis. Whereas the sublingual approach is more accurate in pediatric patients, where we use a high frequency curved array probe, which is about 12 to 22 mm in diameter and 4 to 10 megahertz frequency. This small probe is placed under the tongue in the sublingual region of the pediatric patients. And we look for the hyoid bone. If the hyoid bone is not visible, the invisibility of the hyoid bone is a very strong predictor of difficult laryngoscopy and intubation. This test has a very high sensitivity and specificity with a high positive likelihood ratio of 21.6. Another use of submandibular ultrasound to predict difficult laryngoscopy is by calculating the hyomental ratio. The patient is made to lie supine, and the linear probe is placed longitudinally between the symphysis mentis and the hyoid bone. So we calculate the distance between the symphysis mentis and the hyoid bone in two positions, one in neutral position and number two in the hyperextended position. The ratio between these two distances is normally between 1.12 to 1.16. Any ratio beyond this is a definitive predictor of difficult laryngoscopy. Ultrasound can also be used to detect the depth of endotracheal tube insertion to confirm whether the position of the tube is in the trachea or endobronchial. In 2015, Tessera et al. Came up with this novel technique called the tracheal rapid ultrasound saline test. What they did is they inflated the endotracheal cuff with saline and they placed a probe, high frequency linear probe, in the suprasternal notch. So if the tube is in the endobronchus, as seen in the middle image, in the lower middle image, the structures posterior to the endotracheal tube cannot be visualized. If the structures posterior to the endotracheal tube is not visualized, it means the tube is endobronchial position. And coming to the right lower image, you can see if we can visualize the structures beyond the endotracheal tube, if we can visualize the structures behind the trachea, that means the tube is in the tracheal position. Ultrasound can be used to confirm the position of LMA, or rather, it can be used to confirm the malposition of LMA. After placing the LMA, if we do a submandibular ultrasound and we look for symmetry of the structures. In the first image, you see the hyoid bone, which is symmetrical. In the second image, you can see at the level of vocal cords, you can see the vocal ligament, the arytenoid cartilage, which are symmetrical. If there is asymmetry in the images, it means the LMA is malpositioned. Ultrasound can also be used to visualize and evaluate epiglottitis. If you place a high-frequency linear probe transversely at the level of hyoid bone, we can visualize the epiglottis with the swelling and induration. Whereas on the right side of the image, placing the probe in the longitudinal position can give an alphabetic P sign, which is sign of epiglottitis. Point-of-care ultrasound can also be used to predict post-extubation stridor and airway edema. As you can see, the image on the left, you can see a bright line. You can see a bright hyperechoic line, which is the line of air mucosal interface. It is totally straight, bright, uninterrupted, undisrupted. Whereas on the image on the right, the hyperechoic line has a lot of disruption, indicating a narrow air mucosal interface, which indicates airway edema. Sutherson et al., they hypothesized that the airway Air column width difference less than 1.6 millimeter can be taken to predict post-extubation stridor in children. Now coming to the emerging trends in the pediatric difficult airway algorithms, we have to note that there are more than 14 difficult airway societies and more than 24 independent algorithms for the management of both pediatric and adult airways. We also have to note that most of the pediatric algorithms are a reiteration or a modification of the adult algorithms. In this table, I'm comparing and contrasting the different algorithms of pediatric difficult airway. Most of the framework of these airway algorithms are pretty much the same. However, I want to highlight and contrast the changes or the emerging trends that are happening. The first emerging trend is the use of ECMO by the 2022 ASA Task Force Pediatric Difficult Airway Algorithm, which moves from bag mask ventilation to supraglottic airway device to intubation, again to bag mask ventilation, supraglottic airway device, and then surgical airway. And it also emphasizes on the use of ECMO as a tool for management of difficult pediatric airway. And again, the 2016 All India Difficult Airway Association guidelines also highlighted the value of continuous nasal oxygenation throughout the steps of bag mask ventilation, supraglottic airway device, as well as intubation attempts. All of the pediatric difficult airway algorithms have this general framework. There are 4 basic procedures: the face mask ventilation, the endotracheal intubation, supraglottic airway device insertion, and surgical airway techniques. Many algorithms, they recommend the use of different adjuncts, drugs, and head and neck position. But the most important part of any difficult airway algorithm is the decision making. The decision of when to progress to the next step, or the decision of when to stop the laryngoscopy and intubation attempts or progress to a surgical airway technique. Imagine having a difficult airway scenario in your post-anesthesia care unit of your hospital, and imagine seeing this image on a wall. This can be very intimidating, especially for the faculty who are not aware of the airway algorithms. To overcome this intimidation, there are a number of cognitive tools. One such cognitive tool is the vortex airway approach. In this approach is based on the premise that there are only 3 primary life-saving upper airway devices. Number 1 being the face mask, number 2 being the supraglottic airway device, number 3 being the endotracheal intubation. If these 3 devices fail on 3 attempts, the guidelines actually recommend going in for a surgical cricothyroidectomy. Another example of a cognitive tool is this algorithm from one of the independent institutions from the NHS. This algorithm has pictures, pathways, illustration, and information, thus simplifying decision making in difficult airway scenario. The final and the most important trend that I want to talk about is the role of ECMO in difficult pediatric airway management. ECMO has gained immense validity and acceptance, and it's considered to be one of the most important tools in pediatric airway management. There are multiple case reports wherein preemptively ECMO catheters are placed in anticipated difficult airway patients. Children with severely deformed airway are preemptively catheterized in the right IJV and the right femoral vein, and even before the induction of anesthesia. And in case there is a cannot intubate, cannot oxygenate scenario, the ECMO can be initiated in a matter of minutes. There is also an emergent trend of the exit procedure. There are more and more case reports and more hospitals who have better facilities where the exit procedure is being performed. There is another trend of exit to ECMO. As soon as, if the deformity is so severe and so difficult to manage, the exit procedure can be converted to ECMO by direct veno-venous catheterization. And finally, a word about artificial intelligence and machine learning in pediatric difficult airway. There are multiple AI-driven facial recognition systems which can easily recognize difficult mask ventilation, difficult intubation in pediatric population. There are 2 major studies by Hayasaka et al. And Matawa et al. They are building a database of images, CT images and MRI images, to predict the difficulty in intubation. And there are also multiple 3D printed devices which are still in market right now, especially tracheostomy tubes in neonates and children. So these are all customized to their anatomy. So this is the end of my talk, and I would like to thank Dr. Pranav Gupta for moderating my session and providing guidance on this topic. And these will be my references. You can also access my references through the QR code, and you can also get links to my email address as well as my Twitter handle. Thank you.